So now, how widespread are these problems and what can we do about them? Throughout the series, we've been asking you to share your experiences on our Facebook page, and we've been speaking to leading campaign groups about what needs to change. Katie.
Well, that's right, John. And from what we've been hearing, Anthony, Julie and Zara are not alone. Throughout the series, we've heard from many disabled passengers on our website and Facebook page, all with their own stories of frustration. And some issues keep coming up again and again. Adam Lowton's comment is typical of many. He told us, buses have refused me access on many occasions, and I've been told that I'm not allowed to travel with my wife and my twin girls in their buggy whilst I'm using my wheelchair. Another disabled passenger, Diane Murphy, told us she'd all but given up. She said, I've had nightmares on public transport, and now I'll only go if my husband will be with me. Seeing that he does shift work, it's once in a blue moon. But there is a growing campaign for change. Yesterday, disabled passengers staged a sit-in outside Parliament to protest their right to ride. They say the transport companies aren't listening to them.
It's a fairly bold statement to have to do, to put yourself in the middle of a road, in the middle of London, to stop a bus, to make a point. I mean, and I think that's the depth of the issue, is that we have to do this, because otherwise you're just sidelined.
So we've asked some of the groups demanding change to tell us what can be done to improve things.
We want a third of tube stations in London to be step-free as a bare minimum.
We need talking buses rolled out across the country so that blind and partially sighted people know when to get off.
There should be a centralised regulator with the power to investigate any complaints and to take action against persistent offenders.
Disabled people need to be involved at every level of planning and monitoring of transport services. Nothing about us without us.
We've also heard from many other groups and charities who've told us what they want to see changed, and we've come up with a list of some of the top access demands. Most, as you might expect, mentioned improving infrastructure so disabled people can actually get into more stations and on and off trains and buses. But top of the list for many was the need for better and more regular training for transport staff. And several groups called for a better system on buses so that disabled passengers don't have to fight parents with buggies for space. That's been a real bugbear on our Facebook page. They say some of these simple changes wouldn't cost a lot of money, but would make a huge difference to people's lives. John.
Katie Rousell. Well, let's debate what to do about this. You can join the conversation via our website, live blog, or on Twitter, #NoGoBritain. I want to start with you, Zara, and I'm going to apologise, first of all. I can put all our officials at some rest because you had a job getting into our building, let alone anything else. So none of us have got clean hands in this. But let's be clear. Your problem is with the tube, and what is it?
At the moment, I can't really use the tube because there are only about 10 wheelchair accessible stations, all on the Jubilee line. So I generally have to use buses, which then in a situation as we're coming up to with the Olympics and Paralympics, I'm really, really worried about capacity because I don't think the buses are going to be able to handle the number of wheelchair users. I don't think the tubes are going to be able to handle the number of wheelchair users. I'm lucky, I live in London and I use public transport every day and I know my way around the transport system. But in the next couple of months, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people descending on London who don't know.
Well, let's go straight to Mike Brown, because you're the managing director of the Tube. There's a fair point.
Well, that is a fair point, and of course the Tube is ancient infrastructure. Much of it was built in the Victorian era, apart from new bits, as you say, like the Jubilee Line extension. It is true that 66 stations will be fully accessible by the Olympic and Paralympic Games. That is not a full range across the whole of the Tube system, but I think it does try to give accessible interchange to the main lines of route. The bus network in London is fully accessible, although I do recognise that there are some issues around the capacity, some of the things that were picked up on the report around the priorities with buggies and with disabled people at the same time.
Well, so let's just stick to the Tube for a moment.
One of the issues with the changes that are being made for the Olympics and Paralympics with regard to the Tube is a lot of the measures that are being put in place are temporary measures that are going to be removed once the Olympics has gone away. So I understand that there are things being
Well, let's pick that up. Where's the legacy? Because surely the great legacy of having a Paralympics in London would be that you'd made them accessible permanently, not 66 temporary.
Well, no, they're not 66 temporary. 66, just for the ones who've done, are the ones that are permanently fixed with lifts right down to platform level and indeed permanent.
So there'll be 66 66 stations, never look back.
Absolutely, and permanent platform ramps.
Well, let me pick you up on the Heathrow, Heathrow line, which we illustrated the other day. You can get on at Heathrow, but you can't get off, which isn't great. What's the situation there?
Well, Heathrow has still got some final work to finish before the Games, actually, so Heathrow will be one of the places that will be fully accessible. Platform ramps, which I think is the thing you were referring to, which are temporary provision for the Olympics and Paralympic Games. I'm determined, if successful, which I'm sure they will be, that we'll be able to preserve those as a permanent legacy after the Games.
Now, I want to bring Julie in now, because, Julie, you lost your sight about 3 years ago.
I did, yeah.
And just tell me, what's your big point with transport?
Problem with when you hear about making transport accessible, which is constantly bandied around, 2015 is going to be accessible for everybody. You talk about low floors, that's accessible for wheelchairs, and that's wheelchair users. That's great. But what about people with a visual impairment? It's not going to make any difference to me whatsoever in terms of getting on and off a bus.
What would make a difference?
Well, we hear about talking announcements, because when I get on and off a bus, nobody tells me where the first available seat is. That's something very, very simple. That doesn't require any money. It requires training of a bus driver. And the problem is they don't tell you where to get off. You're relying on a bus driver being kind and a good-natured bus driver. Now, I'm sorry, not all bus drivers are good-natured. And you get this huff factor. You get on the bus and you're inconvenient because you're requiring them to do something extra than drive a bus. So, I appreciate the fact that 2015 buses are going to be accessible, but the question is, accessible to whom?
Very interesting. There is a big human factor here, and it's well illustrated there, John Major.
Certainly, yes. Some in our industry say that a bus is only as accessible as the driver, and I think the points that you make there bear that out. The driver is such a key and important person in the whole of our business, and none more so when we're dealing with accessibility. It's not just about ramps, of course. I mean, there are a number of different aspects that making our buses accessible means, and a big part of that is the training that we do give the drivers.
Well, let me press you on what training you really do give them, because it's all very well making them physically more accessible. But if the driver is suffering from the huff factor, that's not great, is it?
No, it isn't. Can I also say, John, sorry to interrupt, but if I point out that just an example, a practical example is I was told what training is given to a bus company. I'm not going to say which bus company.
It's somewhere in Wales, I guess.
Yes, it is. But I was told, and the bus company are working with me, and it is going to be improved, which is a positive as a result of this programme and our transport conference, which is great. But this is a practical example. They said that in their manual they had 2 pages or 2 slides allocated to visual impairment, and the bus drivers at the start were told to come out of their cubicles and ask people, can they need any help, can we guide you to your seat, etc., etc. On a day-to-day practical level, this is really not happening. So it's all very well and good having in principle, oh, you can do this, but it's not happening. And there should be monitoring, like this covert and overt monitoring, it should be taking place. It's real practical things we need in place, not bits of paper and slides.
No, I agree. And I think we do go a lot further than just bits of paper and slides. A number of our companies actually do practical tests. So they'll put on special vision impairment glasses, the drivers will actually sit in the wheelchairs, things like that, so that they can experience firsthand exactly what it's like to deal with things from your side of it, and hopefully that's going to.
That sounds hopeful, but work in progress, we could say.
Well, I think some considerable achievements, but we can always do better.
Okay, Anthony, you're a trainee teaching assistant. Julie is a head teacher, or was, and we saw you shivering outside a bus in Darlington.
Yeah, it's just basically a lot of buses, and mainly most of the buses in the northeast of England aren't flat, and when they aren't, we're told to wait for the next one, to wait for the next one. This might be okay in the summer, but when it's cold in the winter, I'm not as physically able as you, and I've got to wait around for buses. And my mother's suffering from ill health at the moment, so she can't come and collect me, and I've got to wait in the summer and wait in the winter, and obviously when I get stiff and cold, and then it makes me ill. But can I also just say that also it's the attitude of the drivers. I know, especially when it's cold, and because I know of the snow of 2010, the bus company did actually shut down, and then they said, oh, this is our last bus and you can't get on because we haven't got a ramp. All the customers were going to help me on the bus with being the last one out.
Well, once again, the human factor is absolutely pivotal here again, isn't it? I mean, it's no good saying to somebody in a wheelchair, sorry, mate, you're going to stick around on the pavement for the next
No, it certainly isn't, and I'm sure we would avoid any possibility of that happening. I mean, it must be a very unique experience.
But can I just say, you put all this focus onto London for the Paralympics. I don't live in London, I'm from the northeast of England. Nothing seems to change that. All the focus is on London. Oh, we're going to do this for a Paralympic.
Do you get the sense, after you're a sort of industry-wide character, I mean, do you get the sense that London's having a good time and the rest of the country is neglected?
There's no question that the accessibility on buses in London is second to none. But by 2017, the whole
audible gasp from Zara.
We live in 2012, not 2017.
I know, but by 2017, every single bus on mainland UK will be as accessible as the buses are in London at the moment.
2017, right? I'm going to put Zara. I'll bring you in a moment, but I just want to get on to the question of trains.
I was going to say trains need to be smaller.
Well, Julie, I mean, I'm really interested in talking to you because I think you've just made your second train journey since you lost your sight 3 years ago. How was it? And is there anything you would say to the train operators?
I would. I mean, I could not have travelled on a train without somebody with me. I just could not have done it. And the point is that, to be fair, this lady at the desk when I got my ticket kept saying, I'm sure we could manage to book assistance. I have heard so many horror stories from the people, obviously, in the coalition that I represent, telling me about the number of times they've been left stranded when they've booked assisted travel and all the rest of it, that there is no way I could possibly contemplate travelling on my own, because the fact that the gap between the platform and the step, to step on that on my own, the fact that if I arrived having booked assisted travel, how is that person going to find me? Because I would have to get a taxi from my house to the train station.
Well, let me
how would
bring in
how would
David
they find
Sindel,
me?
because he's actually head of disability and inclusion for the ATOC operating companies.
Yeah.
What comfort?
Well, firstly, Julie, we want everybody to have a good journey, and it doesn't help if you haven't had a successful or helpful journey. We've invested more in the passenger assistance system that we're delivering. So, for example, the old system never used to confirm your booking. Now you'll get a confirmation email that's in an accessible format.
How will the assistant find her?
Well, that's making sure people know where to report in the station.
Right. But I wouldn't be able to find that, because a taxi would drop me off.
Yeah.
Like, I made a joke to saying, would I wear a red rose?
I think,
where would they find me?
It's not like brief encounter. It's going to be nicer or
But I wouldn't be able
worse
to find the reception desk or the customer service desk.
But what I would like to say, though, is that essentially we're working towards looking at making sure that both passengers and the staff in the industry know exactly what should be happening and exactly where people should be. And to do that, I think one of the things that this series of programmes hasn't looked at is how we actually get better quality information to our passengers. We're launching a passenger education programme in a few weeks' time that will be online, that will be accessible, developed by some disabled colleagues in a company called Wide Aware. We're also working to improve the training of our staff as well.
Oh, OK, well, let me just pause the officials for a moment. I can bring you now, Zara, because there's something you could tell viewers, and that is, what should we do about you? At what point does our offer, if I come to you and I take your hand and I say, can I help, ma'am? You might well say, look, I'm a perfectly able-bodied person. I know perfectly what to do. No, thank you. I mean, it's a delicate business.
For buses, it's very simple. At the moment, there's a very large conflict between buggies and wheelchair users, and that's regardless of where you are in the country. If you have a buggy, please fold it. I don't have a choice about whether I fold my wheelchair
Got that, folks out there? Fold your buggies.
Interestingly, I have had a horror story on a train in the last 2 weeks. I booked assistance, I went through your entire assistance process, and I got left on a train in Cambridge with no station staff anywhere in sight. The train had been evacuated.
Stranded on a train to Cambridge. What do we do?
Well, what we do is we look at that very carefully, and if you send me the details, I'll look into it, investigate. But
that's going to happen.
Satisfaction with the assistance is going up, the numbers using assistance is going up, and we're carrying record numbers of disabled people on the rail system
Imagine
now.
that if that had been me, because I would be sitting on, not that it's any better, but imagine if I'd been sat on that train waiting for somebody to come and get me off the train.
But what would have happened if it was me? Because obviously my wheelchair is quite heavy. I wouldn't have been able to get off, and sometimes bus drivers refuse to put ramps out as it is, and I've had to, if the curb has been a couple of inches lower than the bus platform, I've had to try and get myself off, and then I've been sort of wedged underneath because the back wheel is still on the bus.
I think we've raised some good points. I think we've alerted a big human factor, and perhaps the biggest human factor of all is us, is what we do on the train. Why on earth isn't somebody intervening and saying, I'll look after you, ma'am? Thank you all six very warmly indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.